It all started with a laugh, not the laugh of joy or the kind that spreads warmth. No, this was a laugh that sliced through the cool morning air like a knife. The kind of laugh meant to wound. The kind of laugh that doesn't stop at the person it's aimed at, but carries across the neighborhood, making sure every curtain twitches, every ear perks up, every whisper ignites like dry grass on fire. That morning, I had rolled my car out of the garage for the first time in weeks. It wasn't shiny, it wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of car this neighborhood liked to brag about. The paint was faded into a dull gray blue, the chrome edges spotted with age, and the rims carried more dust than polish. To most, it looked like something abandoned, a relic too stubborn to die, a candidate for the scrapyard at best. But to me, it was different. To me, it was history. I had covered it carefully for years, hidden away like a secret too precious to expose to the judgmental eyes of my neighbors. But that Monday morning was different. The air was crisp, the sky was painted with soft light, and something inside me decided it was time to give the car a proper wash. So I slipped the tarp off, stretched the hose, and let the water glide across the hood. Droplets danced on the old paint, rolling down like tiny rivers, and for a moment, it was just me and the machine, a quiet ritual, a bond no one else would ever understand. And then she appeared, Mrs. Langford, the self-crowned queen of the block, the kind of woman who turned every trip to the mailbox into a runway show. Her designer sunglasses glinted in the sunlight, her silk scarf fluttered in the breeze, and her little white dog pranced at the end of its leash like it owned the street. She stopped the second she saw my car. Her head tilted, her lips pursed, and then, with perfect timing, loud enough for every house in earshot to hear, she laughed. "Goodness!" she exclaimed, her voice sharp with delight. "That thing is still running? I thought the junkyard came to collect it years ago." Her husband, walking a few paces behind her in his golf shorts and polo, joined in without hesitation. He was the kind of man who never missed a chance to echo his wife's cruelty. "Surprised the hoe hasn't fined you for that wreck yet," he smirked. "It ruins the view of the street." They didn't stop walking. They just kept going, laughing to themselves, the sound echoing in my ears long after they'd turned the corner. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. On the outside, I kept my focus on the car, letting the water wash over its hood, running my hand gently across the faded paint. But inside, I felt the sting, not because their words had any truth in them, but because this was how it always was here. A neighborhood obsessed with appearances. A place where SUVs gleamed in driveways, lawns were trimmed with military precision, and every porch looked like it had been staged for a magazine. And to them, my car, my treasure, wasn't just old. It was offensive. I whispered quietly, my voice meant only for the car and myself. "They don't know you? But they will." By midweek, the whispers had already spread. I was taking out the trash when I heard two neighbors chatting across their manicured lawns. They weren't subtle. They didn't need to be. "Did you see that heap in his driveway?" one asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't know how someone can live here and think that's acceptable," the other replied. "It lowers property values." There it was. Property values. The holy grail of suburbia. The invisible scoreboard that dictated their lives. To them, my car wasn't just a vehicle. It was a threat. I wanted to laugh. The irony was too delicious. If only they knew the truth, if only they understood that the values they clung to so desperately were, in the end, mine to influence. But patience is power. And patience would make the reveal sweeter. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to the whole meeting. Normally, I skipped them. I had no interest in listening to arguments about acceptable shades of beige for mailboxes or whether a neighbor's grass was a quarter-inch too long. But after the whispers, the stares, and the Langford's smug laughter, I had a feeling that my car was on the agenda. I wasn't wrong. The meeting was hosted, as usual, in the Langfords' living room. Polished hardwood floors gleamed under the glow of an oversized chandelier. A tray of store-bought cookies sat untouched on the coffee table, next to a stack of whole rule books thick enough to stun an ox. The chairs were arranged in a circle, filled with neighbors wearing polite smiles that barely hid their judgment. At the head of the circle sat Collins, the Ho President, a man who lived for moments like these, where he could puff his chest, clear his throat dramatically, and pretend his little folder of regulations made him king. He began, voice heavy with false gravity. "We need to address the issue of unsightly vehicles on driveways," he declared, as though pronouncing sentence in a courtroom. "Specifically, vehicles that appear abandoned or, well, junk." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Not loud, but sharp. Smirks, side glances, muffled chuckles, all of them aimed directly at me. Collins smirked, feeding off the energy. "We all work hard to maintain this neighborhood's reputation. We can't have people leaving old rust buckets in plain view. It affects us all. So, the board has decided to issue a notice." He slid a paper across the coffee table toward me. I picked it up slowly, glancing at the bold letters stamped across the top. "Notice of fine." For a moment, I almost laughed. A fine. For parking my own car, in my own driveway, on property that, if they only knew, was tied to something far greater than they could imagine. But I didn't laugh. Not yet. Instead, I folded the paper neatly, slipped it into my pocket, and looked around the room. "Understood," I said simply. The meeting carried on, full of the usual noise, lawn complaints, fence disputes, noise ordinances, but the air around me buzzed with smugness. They thought they'd won, that they had embarrassed me, that I would be forced to tuck my car away, hide it like a shameful secret. But what they didn't know was that I never played small. The next morning, I was outside again. Not just with the hose this time, but with a bucket, a sponge, and a can of wax I hadn't used in years. I worked slowly, deliberately, polishing every curve, every detail. The sun caught the chrome, dull, but determined to shine. As I worked, neighbors slowed down. Some pretended not to stare, their heads turning just slightly as they passed. Others leaned openly on their mailboxes, whispering to each other. One man from 2 houses down, Garrett, a loudmouth with more opinions than sense, decided to be bold. He strolled right up to the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, smirk plastered across his face. "You know," he said loudly, making sure others could hear, "if you can't afford a real car, maybe you should just keep it hidden. Nobody wants to see that heap rotting away." I kept wiping the hood, not looking at him. "You'd be surprised," I murmured. He chuckled, surprised at what? That the scrapyard would even take it? This time I turned. Slowly, deliberately, I met his eyes and let the silence stretch before I spoke. "That this heap could buy your house 3 times over." His smirk faltered, just for a second. But then he laughed, too loud, too forced, as though trying to drown out the crack in his confidence. "Sure, buddy," he said, shaking his head. "Whatever you say." He walked off, still laughing, but I could see it. The doubt, the unease. I didn't laugh. I didn't need to, because the truth had already been spoken. And soon, the whole block would hear it. That night, I stood at my window, watching the street. Porch lights glowed. Sprinklers hissed. Neighbors carried on their routines, sipping wine on patios, unloading groceries, walking dogs. To them, it was just another evening. To me, it was a stage. They believed they knew me, believed they had power over me, believed their ho notices, their whispers, their laughter meant something. But I knew better. I knew what that car was worth. I knew what the land beneath their feet was worth. And I knew that sooner or later, the day would come when they realized they weren't mocking a man with an old car. They were mocking their landlord. And when that truth came out, their laughter would turn to silence. Because I was done being quiet. The game was only just beginning. The fine sat on my kitchen counter all week. Bold red letters, a number circled in ink, and the pompous signature of Collins, our self-important Ho President. To most people in the neighborhood, it would have been a warning, a reminder that no one was bigger than the rules. But to me, it was a piece of paper destined to become meaningless the moment I revealed the truth. The thing about people who live their lives chasing appearances is that they think everyone else is playing the same game. They think the shine of a new car, the perfect symmetry of a hedge, or the color-matched shutters are what give them status. But what they don't realize is this. True power doesn't come from appearances. It comes from owning the game board they're playing on. And I was ready to show them. The weekend arrived, and with it, another opportunity for the Langfords to strut. Saturday mornings in our neighborhood were practically a parade. Couples would step outside in their matching tennis outfits, SUVs would roll out for brunch, and lawns would hum with the sound of mowers operated by hired crews. It was a ritual, one built on competition, and the subtle but constant reminder that everyone here was being watched. So when I wheeled the car out of the garage again, this time moving it slowly to the center of the driveway, I knew exactly what I was doing. The whispers started immediately. Curtains twitched. Lawn chairs squeaked as neighbors shifted for a better view. A pair of kids pedaled their bikes slower as they passed, craning their necks at the sight of the faded vehicle now fully exposed. And then, like clockwork, came Mrs. Langford. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes but not her sneer. "Honestly, do you enjoy embarrassing yourself?" she asked, her tone dripping with mockery. "This neighborhood has standards, you know. That thing," she gestured dismissively at the car, "is an eyesore. You should be ashamed." Behind her, a few neighbors chuckled. One muttered, "Looks like something out of a junkyard documentary." Another added, "If it breaks down right here, we'll need to call the tow trucks." I let them talk. I let their laughter fill the air. And then, calmly, I straightened up and set the sponge down. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "you might want to stick around. Someone's coming by today. An expert." That caught their attention. "An expert?" One of them scoffed. I nodded. "Yes, to take a look at the car. To tell me what it's really worth." A ripple of laughter followed. Collins, the Ho president, stepped forward from across the street, his chest puffed up as though he'd been waiting for this moment. "Oh, this will be good," he said, grinning. "We'll see just how much that heap of metal is worth." I give it. Maybe a couple $100 in scrap. The crowd chuckled, emboldened by his words. I smiled faintly. "We'll see." About 20 minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. Out stepped a man in a crisp suit, carrying a leather case, and a quiet confidence that silenced the crowd faster than I could have hoped for. His name was Carter, an appraiser and classic car expert who had seen more rare vehicles than most people could dream of. The neighborhood fell into an odd hush as Carter approached, adjusting his tie, his eyes already scanning the car with a glint of curiosity. "This the one?" he asked me. I nodded. "Yes. Take your time." Carter circled the car slowly, his trained eyes moving over every detail, the lines of the body, the original fixtures, the subtle but unmistakable markers of a model that only a handful of people in the world could identify on sight. He crouched low, running his hand along the underside. He peered inside through the window, noting the interior, the untouched details that had survived decades. With every minute that passed, the smirks on my neighbors' faces began to falter. Mrs. Langford crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently. "Well," she demanded finally, "how bad is it? Be honest." Carter straightened, adjusting his glasses. His expression was unreadable as he pulled a small tablet from his case and began typing notes. "Bad?" he echoed, almost amused. "No, not bad at all." The murmurs grew louder. Collins frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's ancient." Carter turned, facing the group. "Ancient, yes, but rare. This isn't junk. It's a collector's dream. In fact, it's one of only a handful left in the entire country. The model, the condition, even the original parts still intact. It's remarkable." Silence fell over the crowd. Finally, Mrs. Langford scoffed. "So what? A few $1,000s? That doesn't change the fact that it looks like garbage." Carter raised an eyebrow. Then, in a voice calm but firm, He delivered the number. "This car is valued conservatively at $2 million." The gasp was audible. The woman actually dropped her coffee cup, the ceramic shattering on the sidewalk. One of the men who had been laughing earlier muttered, "No way," under his breath, his eyes wide. $2 million. The words echoed down the street like a thunderclap. I stood there quietly, arms crossed, watching their faces transform. Smug grins melted into slack-jawed disbelief. Whispered insults turned into stammered silence. The car they had mocked, laughed at, called junk was worth more than every SUV on the block combined. Carter closed his case and shook my hand firmly. "Take good care of her," he said. "You've got something truly special here." "I intend to," I replied with a nod. He climbed back into his SUV and drove away, leaving behind a stunned crowd. For a long moment, no one spoke. The neighborhood was frozen, their carefully constructed superiority shattered in a single instant. Finally, Collins cleared his throat, his voice weak. "Double well, I suppose." "Even so, it's still unsightly." But the words rang hollow. Even he didn't believe them. I looked at him, letting my gaze linger until he shifted uncomfortably. Then I smiled, just slightly. "Funny thing about value," I said quietly. "It's not always about appearances. Sometimes the things you dismiss are the most valuable of all." And with that, I turned back to the car, polishing the chrome until it gleamed in the afternoon sun. Behind me, the whispers began again. But this time, they weren't mocking. They were hushed, curious, nervous, because now they knew the truth. And this was only the beginning. That night, as I sat on my porch, I watched neighbors walk by more cautiously than before. No laughter, no insults, just quiet glances at the car, their minds turning, recalculating. But I knew something they didn't. The car wasn't the only secret I'd been keeping. The real revelation hadn't even arrived yet. Because soon, they wouldn't just realize that the car was worth more than their houses. They'd realize that their houses were mine. And when that moment came, no amount of home notices or smug laughter would save them. The neighborhood had changed overnight. Before, when I stepped outside, I was met with laughter, whispers, and smirks. Now, it was silence. The same neighbors who had mocked me just days ago barely made eye contact. Their morning walks were stiffer. Their conversations hushed. Every glance they stole toward my driveway was heavy with a mix of awe, jealousy, and something else, fear. It was funny, really. The car hadn't changed. The faded paint was still the same. The chrome still bore its battle scars from years gone by. But the moment Carter had said the words $2 million, everything shifted. Suddenly, the car wasn't a heap. It wasn't junk, it was a treasure. And treasures made people nervous. I sat on my porch the morning after, sipping coffee, when Mrs. Langford approached. Not strutting this time, no scarf fluttering dramatically. Her sunglasses were still on, but her confidence was cracked. "Good morning," she said, her voice sweet in a way it had never been before. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, clutching her dog's leash tighter than usual. "Listen, about the other day, when I commented on your car." "Laughed at it," I corrected gently. She flinched but forced a smile. "Well, yes, but I didn't realize. No one realized how valuable it was." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting her words hang in the air. "So?" I asked finally. "So," she continued, shifting uncomfortably. "I suppose what I'm saying is, you should consider showcasing it. Maybe at one of our neighborhood events. It would be good for the community. Raise our profile, attract attention." I almost laughed. There it was, the shift from mockery to exploitation. One moment, the car was an eyesore. The next, it was a trophy they wanted to parade around like it belonged to them. "Not interested," I said flatly. Her smile faltered. She tugged at the leash. "Well, just think about it," she muttered before walking off, her dog trotting behind. By the weekend, the whispers had evolved into rumors. "He must have inherited money." "No, I heard he used to be in finance." Maybe he's hiding something. Nobody normal just has a car like that. It didn't matter what theories they cooked up. None of them were even close to the truth. But Collins wasn't satisfied with whispers. At the next home meeting, he came out swinging. "Neighbors," he announced, his voice booming with self-importance. "We have to address the ongoing issue of appearances. One rare car or not, we cannot allow our community standards to slip." He gestured broadly, pacing like a politician. "If we let one person park old vehicles in their driveway, what's next? Broken fences? Dying lawns? We cannot afford to let this place become ordinary." Murmurs of agreement followed, though softer than before. A few people stole glances at me, nervous. Collins pointed a finger. "So I propose an additional fine. And if compliance is not met, we escalate. Towing, legal action, whatever it takes." The room went quiet. Even his supporters shifted uneasily. That's when I stood, slowly, calmly. "Careful, Collins," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "You're playing a game you don't understand." His face flushed. "Is that a threat?" "No," I replied evenly. "It's advice. You should listen." I sat back down, letting the tension hang in the air like a storm cloud. The next day, a letter arrived. Notice of escalated fine. This time, the number was larger, laughably larger, and the language was harsher. Threats of legal action, threats of property liens, all signed with Collins' signature in smug, slanted ink. I folded the letter neatly, set it beside the first fine, and smiled to myself. Because I knew something Collins didn't. The Ho could threaten all it wanted. It could issue fines, send letters, even call lawyers. But none of it mattered. Not when I owned the very land beneath their houses. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, I walked slowly down the street. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, unsure whether to greet me or avoid me entirely. A few muttered awkward hellos, their voices shaky. I passed the Langfords' pristine garden, the smell of fresh mulch hanging in the air. I passed Garrett's lawn, his mower lines sharp enough to measure with a ruler. Every house looked perfect, polished, staged. And every house belonged to me. He didn't know it yet, of course. To them, I was still the odd neighbor with the old car. But soon, they would know. And when they did, their world would shatter. A few days later, Collins showed up at my doorstep. No letter this time. No meeting. Just him, red-faced and seething, fists clenched at his sides. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" He spat. I raised an eyebrow. "Better? No smarter?" "Maybe." His nostrils flared. "That car doesn't make you untouchable. This neighborhood has rules, and I'll make sure you follow them. One way or another." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You should be very careful about the words you choose, Collins, because soon you'll realize I don't answer to your rules. You answer to mine." He blinked, confusion flashing in his eyes. But before he could respond, I closed the door gently in his face. That night, I sat in my living room, the documents spread across the table. Property deeds, ownership papers, legal proof that I wasn't just another homeowner here, I was the landlord. The block wasn't theirs. It was mine. Every mortgage, every lease, every inch of manicured lawn, they all traced back to me. I ran my fingers over the papers, the weight of them heavier than any insult Collins or the Langfords could throw. The time for patience was ending. The time for silence was over. The reveal was coming. And when it did, the neighborhood would never be the same. The storm had been brewing for weeks. Collins' threats, the Langfords' false sweetness, Garrett's nervous smiles, the whispers that swirled through every hedgerow and across every manicured lawn. And now, the storm was ready to break. The summons arrived on a Tuesday. Not a fine this time. A formal notice, delivered by hand. Collins stood on my porch, chin high, smugness plastered back onto his face like fresh paint. He shoved the envelope into my hands without a word, then turned on his heel and strutted back down my driveway. I waited until he was halfway across the street before opening it. Inside was a typed letter on whole letterhead, full of legal jargon, but with a single message: comply, or we escalate to court. I laughed, out loud, full and sharp, the sound echoing across the quiet street. Curtains twitched, dogs barked, neighbors froze in their yards. They didn't know why I was laughing, but they felt it. Because deep down, they were starting to sense the truth that Collins and his hoe weren't the kings they thought they were. That night, I invited them in, not to my home. No to the truth. I sent a message to Collins, to Mrs. Langford, to Garrett, and a few of the more vocal complainers. A single line: tomorrow night, my house, 7 p.m. Bring whoever you want. They came. Of course they did. Curiosity is a powerful leash. At exactly 7, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find them all there. Collins in his too-tight polo, Mrs. Langford with her pearls gleaming under the porch light, Garrett looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. A handful of others trailed behind, their faces tight with suspicion. "Let's make this quick," Collins said as he pushed inside without waiting for an invitation. "We don't have all night." I smiled faintly. "Oh, yes you do," I thought. "You have all the time in the world." I led them into the living room. The table was already prepared, not with snacks, not with drinks, but with documents. Stacks of them, neat, organized, undeniable. "Sit," I said. They did. "What is this?" Mrs. Langford asked, eyeing the papers like they might bite. "This," I said slowly, deliberately, "is why your letters don't matter. Why your fines don't matter. Why your threats don't matter." I slid the first folder across the table toward Collins. "Open it." He frowned but obeyed. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. The color drained from his face. "What? What is this?" he stammered. "Property deeds," I said calmly. "Filed years ago, before you moved in, before your precious hoe ever held its first meeting. Deeds that say, quite clearly, that I own the land under every single house on this block." The room went silent. Mrs. Langford let out a sharp laugh, brittle and false. "That's ridiculous. Nobody owns all the land. The developers sold it," I interrupted. "To me, quietly, cheaply, because nobody cared at the time. Nobody thought these lots would be worth anything. But I saw it. I bought them. And now," I spread my hands wide, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Now you all live on my land." Gasps rippled around the room. Garrett shook his head in disbelief. "No, no, that can't be. My mortgage." "Your mortgage is with the bank," I said. "But your land lease? That's with me. Check your documents. Read the fine print you all ignored when you signed. You own your houses. But the ground they sit on? That's mine." Collins slammed the folder shut, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. If this were true, we would have known. You didn't know because you didn't look." I cut him off. Too busy measuring lawns and sending fines to notice who really held the power. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The chandelier above buzzed faintly, the only sound in the suffocating silence. Then Mrs. Langford leaned forward, her pearls trembling against her throat. "What? What does this mean?" she asked quietly. I met her gaze. "It means this. Every time you mocked me, you were standing on soil that belongs to me. Every time you laughed at my car, you did it on land I own. Every fine, every insult, every whisper, none of it mattered. Because at the end of the day, this block isn't yours." I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "It's mine." Panic set in quickly after that. Some of them demanded proof. Others insisted it wasn't possible. Collins blustered about legal challenges, about loopholes, about lawsuits. But beneath it all was fear. Because they knew. Deep down, they knew the truth. And fear doesn't lie. The fallout was delicious. The very next day, Mrs. Langford showed up on my porch again. No pearls this time. No sunglasses. Just a shaken woman clutching a casserole dish like it was a peace offering. "I made lasagna," she said softly, almost pleading. "Thought you might like some." I took it without a word, then closed the door in her face. Garrett followed 2 days later, offering to mow my lawn for free. Collins, stripped of his authority, tried to rally the hoe, but it crumbled from within. Meetings dissolved into chaos. Arguments broke out. Neighbors who once followed his every word now whispered behind his back, blaming him for the mess. The hoe was dead, and I had killed it. The block became mine in more ways than one. Where once I was the outcast, now I was the center. Where once they mocked, now they deferred. Compliments flowed where insults once lived. Smiles replaced sneers. But none of it mattered to me, because the power wasn't in their smiles. It wasn't in their fear. The power was in the truth. And the truth was simple. They thought they were homeowners. They thought they had control. They thought they could laugh at me. But they were wrong. I owned the ground beneath their feet, and no amount of laughter could change that. One evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the street. The same porches, the same sprinklers, the same flickering lights. But the air was different now. Not laughter. Not whispers. Silence. A silence born not of peace, but of fear. And fear, I thought as I sipped my drink, was better than laughter. Because fear lasts longer. The days after my revelation were quiet. Almost too quiet. For a neighborhood that once thrived on gossip, on laughter and whispers, on endless chatter about who painted their shutters the wrong shade of beige or who let their grass grow an inch too high, silence was unnatural. But silence, I realized, was the sound of fear settling in. And it was beautiful. Neighbors who once avoided me now crossed the street just to nod in my direction. Some waved too eagerly, their hands trembling slightly in the air. Others dropped gifts on my porch, baskets of fruit, homemade pies, even a bottle of vintage wine someone had been saving for a special occasion. Special occasion indeed. I didn't ask for their offerings. I didn't need their approval, but I accepted everything. Because every gift, every nervous smile was a reminder. They weren't just trying to be kind. They were trying to be safe. Collins, of course, was the hardest hit. He tried at first to keep up the facade. He stormed into what was left of the home meetings, waving his arms, shouting about fraudulent deeds and illegal ownership. He tried to rally the neighbors, promising lawsuits and court victories. But the more he shouted, the fewer people showed up. Until one night, the meeting hall was empty. No minutes recorded. No motions passed. No hoe. He was done. The next day, I saw him on his lawn, ripping the hoe sign out of the ground with his bare hands. His wife shouted at him from the porch. His kids stared in confusion. And I just sat on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the self-appointed king of the block dethrone himself. Mrs. Langford took another route. Where once she carried herself like royalty, now she humbled herself like a servant. Every time she saw me, she tried to strike up conversation. "How's the weather treating you? Lovely car you've got. Truly unique. Oh, I just love what you've done with your yard." Each compliment was a dagger, not to me, but to her pride. And I relished every one. Garrett surprised me most. He didn't grovel. He didn't flatter. He just accepted. One evening, he knocked on my door. No fake smile, no casserole dish, no excuses. Just him, standing in the fading sunlight. "I know what you did," he said simply. "I know you outplayed them. And honestly, they had it coming." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for the catch. But there wasn't one. He just nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "They laughed too long. They never saw you coming. I respect that." Then he left. No bribes. No pleasantries. Just respect. And strangely enough, that meant more than all the gifts in the world. As weeks passed, the block settled into its new rhythm. Not the old rhythm of hoe commands and neighborly compliance. Not the chaos of open warfare. Something new. Something mine. Nobody parked without thinking twice. Nobody painted their fences without wondering what I might think. Nobody laughed at me anymore. They couldn't, because the punchline had changed. I wasn't the joke anymore. I was the truth they were all too afraid to say out loud. That power doesn't always come from titles. That ownership isn't always obvious. That sometimes the quiet man with the junk car is the one pulling all the strings. One night, I rolled the car, the same car they once mocked, into the driveway again. Its engine purred, its polished frame gleaming under the moonlight. And I left it there, not hidden, not protected, just sitting. The next morning, I caught them looking. Collins from behind his curtains, Mrs. Langford from her porch, Garrett from across the street. They stared, but nobody left. Not anymore, because they finally understood what the car really was. Not a piece of junk, not an eyesore, but a symbol, a reminder that the block they thought they ruled belonged to me. And every time they looked at it, they would remember. Weeks turned into months. The hoe dissolved formally, its bylaws shredded and abandoned. The sign at the entrance to the neighborhood, "Welcome to Maplewood Estates, a proud hoe community," was taken down in the dead of night. Nobody spoke of replacing it. Nobody dared. Instead, the neighborhood existed in a strange new balance. A block without an hoe, held together not by rules or fines, but by unspoken fear. And at the center of it all sat me. The man they once mocked. The man with the junk car. The man who owned their block. One evening, as the sun set in blazing orange and gold, I sat on my porch again, whiskey in hand. The car gleamed at the curb, silent and still. For the first time in months, I let myself laugh. Not the bitter laugh I used when they mocked me. Not the sharp laugh I used when I revealed the truth. But a genuine laugh. Because finally, they understood. And in that understanding, in that silence, in that fear, I had won.